Judge's gavel slammed against the bench with a crack that echoed through the packed courtroom. Judge Richard Hale stared directly at the medal pinned above my heart.
"Ms. Rebecca Carter," he said,
his voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Remove that Navy Cross immediately. This is a courtroom, not a stage for military theatrics." A ripple of whispers spread across the gallery. Across the aisle, my sister-in-law, Vanessa, leaned back in her chair with the smallest smile curling across her lips. She didn't look surprised. She looked relieved, as if the judge had just done exactly what she'd been hoping for. I glanced down at the Navy Cross. It wasn't just another medal. 3 years earlier, after the ceremony in Washington, my commanding officer had handed it to me. But he wasn't the one who pinned it on my uniform. My brother, Michael, had stepped forward with trembling hands and a smile I'll never forget. He'd looked me straight in the eyes and said, "No matter where life takes us, you'll always be my hero, Becca." That was the last military ceremony he ever attended. Slowly, I removed the medal and placed it on the defense table. "I'll comply with the court's order, Your Honor," I answered calmly. Judge Hale gave a satisfied nod. He believed he'd just put me in my place. He had no idea that his decision and the reason behind it would eventually cost him the robe he'd worn for nearly 3 decades. As I stood there in that silent courtroom, my mind drifted back to the day this nightmare truly began. Cancer didn't just take my older brother. It stole the kindest man I'd ever known. Michael had spent his entire life on our family's Colorado ranch. Even before sunrise, you could hear the familiar rumble of his old pickup truck rolling down the gravel driveway. Every evening, he came home smelling of fresh cut, cedar and engine oil. After another long day fixing fences or helping neighbors who never even had to ask, he believed family wasn't something you talked about. It was something you proved. When the doctor said he had only weeks left, he never complained. His only concern was his wife and his 2 children. At his funeral, more than 200 people came to say goodbye. I barely remember the pastor's words. I barely remember the music. What I do remember was Vanessa. She cried loudly enough for everyone to notice. She hugged every guest. She thanked people for coming. She looked like the perfect grieving widow until the service ended. Less than 15 minutes later, while Michael's children were still standing beside their father's grave, Vanessa quietly pulled our family attorney aside. "I'd like to schedule the estate meeting as soon as possible," she whispered. "The ranch shouldn't sit tied up in paperwork." I stared at her, stunned. My brother had been buried for less than an hour. That night, I drove to the ranch to pick up a few family photographs. The front door was wide open. Inside, strangers were placing colored stickers on furniture. One man was photographing Michael's antique rifle collection. Another was wrapping my mother's handmade dining table in moving blankets. "What is this?" I demanded. Vanessa didn't even look embarrassed. She simply smiled. "I'm getting organized." "You mean you're selling his belongings?" "They're assets, Rebecca," she replied flatly. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills." Before I could answer, Michael's 10-year-old son quietly tugged on my sleeve. His eyes were red from crying. "Aunt Becca." I knelt beside him. "What's wrong, buddy?" He swallowed hard. "Mom said Grandpa's ranch won't belong to our family much longer." My heart sank, because I knew something that child didn't. Michael's will specifically protected that ranch for his children. No one could legally sell it, unless someone was planning to challenge the will itself. 3 days later, a process server knocked on my front door. "Rebecca Carter?" "Yes." "You've been served." I looked down at the papers. Vanessa Carter was suing me. She claimed I had manipulated my dying brother into changing his will, and demanded that the court strip me of my position as trustee. I thought the lawsuit was about money. I was wrong. It was the opening move in a plan far darker than I could have imagined, and one phone call from my attorney would prove it. The morning after I was served, I met my attorney, Daniel Harper. Daniel had spent nearly 25 years handling probate cases, and every time he was about to deliver bad news, he did the same thing. He took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly with his navy blue handkerchief, then looked you straight in the eye. That morning was no different. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "lock the door." The moment I did, he slid a yellow legal pad across his desk. "I don't think Vanessa filed this lawsuit to win." "Then why sue me?" "Because she needs everyone focused on you, while nobody looks at her." He opened a folder filled with bank statements. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then he pointed to a signature. Do you recognize it? I stared for only a second before shaking my head. That's supposed to be Michael's. It is. It can't be. During Michael's final weeks, cancer had left his hands trembling so badly that even signing birthday cards exhausted him. The signature in front of me was smooth, confident, perfect. Daniel removed his glasses again. So you noticed it too. Over the next several weeks, we quietly hired 2 independent experts who had never worked together before. One examined the signatures, the other followed the money. Neither knew what the other had found. Yet both reached the same conclusion. Someone had forged Michael's name, and someone had been moving money out of the family trust months before his death. The transfers were small, always just below the amount that would automatically trigger additional review. Whoever planned it knew exactly what they were doing. I left Daniel's office with more questions than answers. Halfway home, I stopped at the neighborhood grocery store to pick up dinner. I wasn't there 5 minutes before I heard a familiar voice behind me. Rebecca, I turned. Vanessa stood beside her cart wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy afternoon. She smiled politely, just loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. I saw your picture in the paper. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. It must be difficult, having everyone wonder whether you took advantage of your own dying brother. A few people nearby looked at me. I could feel their eyes. Vanessa smiled sympathetically, almost as if she felt sorry for me. Then she whispered so only I could hear, "By the time this case is over, you won't even be welcome at Michael's grave." She pushed her cart away before I could respond. That night, I sat alone on the porch of the ranch. Michael's old rocking chair still creaked in the evening wind. For a moment, I could almost hear him laughing after another long day repairing fences. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was lower than usual. I found something. What is it? The court released the judge assignment. Who drew the case? He hesitated. Judge Richard Hale. I recognized the name immediately. Fair. Strict. Almost impossible to persuade. But Daniel didn't sound relieved. He sounded concerned. Rebecca. What? I spent the afternoon reviewing his recent estate cases. And? He was silent for several seconds. When Vanessa's law firm appears before him, they almost never lose. I stared into the darkness surrounding the ranch. For the first time since Michael's funeral, I stopped worrying about the lawsuit and started worrying about the judge. By the following Monday morning, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Rain tapped steadily against the courthouse windows while reporters, local residents, and distant relatives whispered among themselves. News of the lawsuit had spread far beyond our county. Vanessa arrived a few minutes later wearing an elegant navy suit. She didn't acknowledge the jury. She didn't look at the reporters. She looked only at me. Then she smiled. Not with confidence, with certainty. Daniel stood beside me, quietly removing his glasses and polishing them with the same blue handkerchief he carried every day. It was a habit I'd come to recognize. Whenever Daniel expected the ground to shift beneath someone's feet, he cleaned his glasses first. Rebecca, he said softly. Yes? No matter what happens today, trust the evidence. I do. Judge Richard Hale entered through the side door. All rise. The room stood as one. The judge settled into his chair, adjusted the case file, and scanned the courtroom. Oddly, his eyes stopped on the Navy Cross before they stopped on me. At the time, I thought nothing of it. The trial began. Vanessa's attorney spent nearly 20 minutes, attacking my character instead of the facts. He called me an absentee sister, a career military officer who had supposedly abandoned her family and returned, only after Michael's death to seize control of his estate. Not once did he mention the forged signatures. Not once did he mention the missing trust funds. He wanted the jury judging me, not the evidence. Finally, he turned toward the bench. Your Honor, the defense has chosen to appear in full military dress uniform. He paused just long enough for every juror to look at me. The plaintiff believes those decorations are being used to win sympathy, rather than justice. Judge Hale folded his hands. Ms. Carter. I stood. Approached the bench. Every footstep echoed across the silent courtroom. No one whispered. No one moved. Even the steady rain outside seemed to disappear. I stopped in front of the bench. Judge Hale looked directly at the metal above my heart. This courtroom recognizes evidence, well, not decorations. Remove the Navy Cross. For one heartbeat, my hand tightened around the metal. I saw Michael standing beside me years earlier, smiling with pride as he pinned it onto my uniform after the ceremony. Then the memory disappeared. Training took over. Without saying a word, I carefully removed the Navy Cross and placed it gently on the defense table. I'll comply with the court's order, Your Honor. Judge Hale gave a short, satisfied nod. Very well. He believed he had established control. He had no idea. He had just created the single biggest turning point of the entire trial. Daniel slowly rose from his chair. He hadn't looked at me once that morning. That was how I knew he was carrying something enormous. As a preliminary matter, Your Honor, Daniel said calmly, the defense has an urgent procedural motion. Vanessa's attorney was on his feet immediately. Objection. This is highly irregular. It is, Daniel replied. But so are the circumstances. He reached into his briefcase and removed a thick sealed evidence envelope. The moment it appeared, Vanessa instinctively gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table. Her knuckles turned white. Judge Hale's expression didn't change. But his eyes did. For the briefest moment, they remained fixed on the court seal stamped across the envelope. Just a heartbeat longer than they should have. Then he looked away. What exactly is that? He asked. Daniel walked to the clerk's desk and carefully placed the envelope before the bench. Evidence. We've already completed discovery, Judge Hale replied sharply. Not this evidence. His voice hardened. Explain. Daniel met the judge's eyes without hesitation. These are documents that should have been before this court months ago. But someone worked very hard to make sure they never arrived. The courtroom fell into complete silence. No one shifted. No one coughed. Judge Hale looked down at the unopened envelope. His hand moved toward it, then stopped. He stared at it for several long seconds, as if opening it might expose far more than anyone in that courtroom was prepared to see. From here, Part 4 can deliver the payoff while keeping the judge's misconduct believable, focusing on ethics, violations, improper handling of evidence, and bias rather than an implausible instant conspiracy. For several long seconds, Judge Hale didn't move. His hand rested on the sealed envelope, as if he already knew opening it would change everything. Finally, he broke the seal. The first document wasn't a financial record. It was a sworn affidavit from an independent forensic document examiner. He read the first page, then the second. The confidence slowly disappeared from his face. Daniel stood. Your Honor, 2 independent experts concluded that every signature, attributed to Michael Carter on the amended trust, documents was forged. The courtroom went silent. Daniel turned on the courtroom display. A timeline appeared. Every transfer from Michael's trust. Every withdrawal. Every suspicious transaction. The money started leaving the trust while Michael was in hospice care, Daniel said. And it continued after he could no longer authorize financial decisions. Vanessa immediately stood. That's impossible. Daniel calmly handed another document to the clerk. Then perhaps you can explain this. It was Michael's handwritten letter, the one Vanessa feared most. The clerk began reading. If anything happens to me, I want Rebecca to protect the ranch, until my children are old enough to decide its future. Vanessa reached toward the letter, then stopped. She didn't need to read it. She already knew whose handwriting it was. For the first time that morning, she looked afraid. Judge Hale slowly turned the next page. Daniel's voice became quieter. Your Honor, this case also contains a judicial disclosure issue. The courtroom froze. The plaintiff's law firm had a business connection with your brother-in-law that was never disclosed before this trial. Judge Hale stared at the document. We are not making accusations beyond the evidence, Daniel continued. But this relationship should have been revealed. The judge lowered the papers. The court will recess. 30 minutes later, everyone returned. Judge Hale removed his glasses and looked across the courtroom. I have served on this bench for 31 years. His voice was calm. During that time, I have reminded countless people that justice cannot be based on assumptions. He looked down. Today, I failed to follow my own advice. The room remained silent. He looked at me. Ms. Carter, this court owes you an apology. His eyes moved briefly toward the Navy Cross resting on the table. I allowed appearances to distract me from the truth. Then he turned toward Vanessa. Based on the evidence presented today, the plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. The financial records will be referred to the appropriate authorities for further investigation. Vanessa slammed her hands onto the table. No, Michael wanted me to have that ranch. Daniel slowly placed one final document before the judge. The final letter from Michael. Judge Hale read it quietly, then looked up. Mrs. Carter, I believe this matter is finished. Vanessa's attorneys packed their files without saying a word. She was finally alone. I walked back to the defense table and picked up my Navy Cross. Then I looked toward the gallery. Michael's son stood beside his sister. His eyes moved from the medal to me, and he smiled. I pinned it back over my heart. Not because a judge allowed it. Because my brother once told me, "You'll always be my hero, Becca." Months later, Michael's children kept the ranch. One evening, while repairing the old fence Michael and I built years ago, his son looked at me. My dad was right. I smiled. He always said you were our hero. I looked across the land my brother loved. I kept my promise, Michael. For the first time since his funeral, it finally felt like home.